I'm sure many must have thought the same when they saw Leia floating through space and pulling herself back into the ship. Admittedly, the song wasn't the first thing that popped into my head. I was more like this. So what I want to address in this episode is the Force and how it doesn't have any boundaries. Or does it? As mentioned, we have Leia's space adventure, then we have Kylo Ren and Rey's connection, Ghost Yoda using lightning, and Luke's projection onto Rey. Before I get into these moments specifically, I must address the common counter-argument against the criticism that this movie pulled Force powers out of nowhere. An argument against this is that in the original trilogy, Force powers were invented all the time without properly setting them up. They were invented on the spot, and therefore the powers in The Last Jedi are no different. Influencing people's minds isn't set up and used out of the blue by Obi-Wan to get past stormtroopers. Pulling objects towards you was never a thing until Luke was about to get mauled by a Wampa on Hoth. In the very next scene we get to see Ghost Obi-Wan telling Luke to go to Dagobah, and the Emperor using lightning coming out of his hands was never a thing up until that moment in Return of the Jedi. Of course, the prequels could not expand on Force powers because that would create a continuity disaster. Instead, they worked with Force powers that were already introduced and simply toyed with the power level of each ability introduced in the original trilogy. I have to remain fair and say that there is merit in the aforementioned argument, only to a certain degree. I still believe it is valid to criticize The Last Jedi's use of the Force, but not because of what kind of Force power it introduces. It's how they are used and in what situation, so the when they are used question basically. The context in which the powers are used is very important, and that's where the original trilogy does things better. Using a mind trick to get past stormtroopers is a minor thing. It was an obstruction that could have been solved in different ways. Also, it's not established as an overpowered ability because Obi-Wan immediately says it only works on the weak minds. Luke pulling a saber from the snow to save himself from the Wampa is maybe the worst offender, but even in that regard it's not that big of a deal. Luke began his journey with the Force in episode 4. 3 years span between episode 4 and 5, so we can assume that Luke has expanded his knowledge on the Force, or at least practiced with it in some way. That still doesn't take away the Deus Ex Machina moment, the flavor of the moment I should say, but it's enough to make it believable. The ghost of Obi-Wan is not a big deal. It's basically another form of communication, such as Obi-Wan communicating with Luke post-mortem in the original Star Wars. The ghosts are basically plot devices. Until The Last Jedi, that is, but we'll get there. Luke reaching out to Leia while he hangs underneath Cloud City is so-so. The ability to communicate has been established, but never with a non-Force user, which Leia still was at that moment. And lastly, the Emperor shooting lightning out of his hands. This is the least offensive when it comes to the Force powers. It's a way of making Luke hurt, of perhaps even killing the guy, to make the Emperor more menacing, but the Force power itself was never needed to hurt or kill Luke. The Emperor could have just choked him like Vader can. And it has been established that dark side users use the Force for attacking, so it kind of makes sense in a way. So the original trilogy is not entirely free of criticism, that's true. However, its offenses are quite minor when compared to The Last Jedi. Firstly, because The Last Jedi pulls 4 stunts in one movie. And secondly, the Force powers used in The Last Jedi have quite an impact on the scenes in which they are used and the overall lore of the Star Wars universe. Before I delve deeper into that, I'll explain what the Force is in terms of storytelling. It is a magic system, the magic system of the Star Wars universe, according to Sanderson's first law. The Force is a soft magic system, which means there are never any strong rules defined about what it can do, what its limits are, what costs there are to its use, or what source it taps into, and questions like that. This keeps the Force mysterious and free to be experimented with. This freedom, this power if you will, also comes with great responsibility. Because having no clearly defined limits to your magic system allows you to go wild with your imagination and create all sorts of powers. But this does not mean that you as a writer can just pull any kind of power out of your ass to serve your story at the right time. Doing it in a way, for example, to get your characters out of a hairy situation will feel like cheating. The powers that you insert still need to be carefully set up. In a hard magic system, that is a lot easier to pull off because the story itself establishes clear rules in terms of its magic. Think superheroes of the MCU. They have very specific powers with very specific limits. In anime realms we have Fullmetal Alchemist and Naruto, for example, who also have hard magic systems. But like I said, soft magic is more difficult to pull off because of its mysterious nature. And that, my dear viewers, is where I think The Last Jedi fails utterly. So let's dissect these moments in the movie one by one. Number 1. Leia using the Force to survive her space flight and float back into the Radius. The problem here is the lack of setup. Yes, we know Leia is a Force-sensitive individual, she's a Skywalker after all, but unlike Luke, she hasn't had a single day of training as a Jedi. Luke in the original Star Wars was becoming more acquainted with the Force throughout the movie, so depending on it in the end when he has to blow up the Death Star is kind of fair game. But even if it wasn't, that particular moment was the culmination of his arc in that movie. Thematically, it made sense. Sometimes, theme comes before logic, but that is a subject that merits its own video. In Leia's case, there is no setup, not even a small hint. So her suddenly being able to use the Force so adequately in a life-threatening moment is convenient and to the audience feels like cheating. If it had been set up in some way, like telling us earlier on that Leia had some sort of training with Luke, it would have been far more believable. Secondly, and this is more science territory, I personally am not sold on the fact that a person could survive that long in a vacuum of space. Perhaps it is possible, I don't know, but it seems like a stretch, thus the scene kind of fractures your suspension of disbelief and has you asking questions rather than staying immersed in the story. Number 2. Rey and Kylo Ren's connection via Snoke. So their connection allows them to see each other. In fact, they can even be physically affected, as proven by the water drops Kylo Ren notices on his glove that come from Acto, where Rey is. It turns out though that this is all the doing of Snoke. He purposely connected the two so they could be drawn towards each other and Kylo would eventually convince Rey to join him or something in that realm. The immediate question arises is how does Snoke know to connect Rey? He's never seen her. Also, he is still adamant on fighting Luke and apparently doesn't know that Rey is with Luke, meaning he doesn't know where she is or he is. Yet he is able to connect these two individuals via the Force up to a point where they are physically present in each other's environments. That seems like a pretty powerful ability, leading me to believe that Snoke is one heck of a Force user. The problem is that the power being Snoke's, not the power itself, but the power being Snoke's, is in no way foreshadowed, and we are only shared in the knowledge that it was Snoke after the fact. That seems to me like the connection that being Snoke's doing was haphazardly put in by Rian Johnson without looking at the implications of it. And to be completely fair, I much more like the idea of the connection between Rey and Kylo just happening spontaneously because they have a bond of some sorts. The mystery behind the power is completely taken away and when it is revealed to be just my evil master plan. It makes him appear absurdly powerful, which in turn makes his death at the hands of Kylo Ren seem all the stranger for it. He can establish such a powerful connection but not detect that Kylo Ren is about to kill him instead of Rey? Seems a bit weird. Number 3. Yoda, God of Thunder. Yoda appears in The Last Jedi. Spoiler alert. It is quite funny and a nostalgic moment with a universally useful lesson told by our little green friend. Aesthetically, I did have some issues with them using the puppet instead of the CGI form. It seems more useful to use the CGI form because you can have more expressions on it, but I get why they used the puppet, it's purely for nostalgic reasons. Anyway, he called down lightning to burn a tree with the ancient Jedi text in it, or so we think. Something Luke was about to do as well, but didn't because of Yoda's sudden appearance. I honestly did chuckle when he said, "Read them, have you? Page turners, they are not." In any case, move aside 4, Ghost Yoda is here and he can summon lightning. A Force ghost interacted with the physical world and affected it. Not just a little, no, with a lightning bolt. You may think, what's the big deal? Aren't you nitpicking here? No, I honestly don't think I am. This changes the way we look at these Force ghosts, mostly in a retroactive manner. It defies the established logic, namely that they're ghosts. They can't interact with the world on any physical level, apart from sitting on things. Only communicate. Until now, I guess. Does this mean dying is not really an issue in Star Wars? I mean, you could just return as a ghost and help the living, I suppose. It's bits like these that hurt the consistency of the established Star Wars lore, and that is what people have a problem with. Point 4. Luke's astral projection. During the battle on Crait, when the First Order is about to enter the old base, Luke appears. First within the base and interacts with Leia for a short bit. A genuine awesome moment for fans and general audiences. It's like one of those few instances where Luke is actually Luke, the old Luke from Return of the Jedi. More on that in the next episode. And has a heartwarming talk with his twin sister. He hands her the dice that used to hang within the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. Though this is kind of weird because the dice are projected as well, yet when Luke lets go of them they're still there. And even when he's long gone, the dice do not disappear until Kylo finds them. But that is of course for the dramatic effect. Luke then heads outside and faces off with Kylo Ren. Now, Luke looks younger and has his old blue lightsaber, the blue lightsaber that not 20 minutes ago in the movie was broken apart by Kylo Ren and Rey. Enough signs that something isn't quite right, you'd say. Even the new AT-ATs fire upon Luke, but nothing happens to him, much to Kylo Ren's anger. They have a battle, sort of, and when Kylo Ren slices through Luke, it is finally revealed he isn't really there. He was only a distraction, so the Resistance could get away through the back entrance. This part right here hurts the movie more than it benefits it, because it hurts Kylo Ren's character as a whole. It doesn't make him menacing at all, which he should be, as he is the main villain of the movie. The real Luke on Acto looks at the binary sunset, for nostalgic purposes again, and then disappears, probably into the Force. The very first question I had was, how did Luke know where the Resistance was? Rey didn't know anything about Crait, so she couldn't tell him. Then the astral projection itself. While the Force power on its own doesn't seem all that significant, how it is used in this particular scene is. You see, it allows the Resistance to escape, ending the movie's conflict. Again, a Force power is introduced at a time when it is most needed. It can be argued that it was kind of foreshadowed with Rey and Kylo Ren being able to physically interact, while she was on Acto and he was on the Supremacy. But it still feels like a convenience, because Luke provided exactly that which was needed most at the right time, a distraction. And Luke dies from this, which makes me wonder how the use of this Force power affects the user relative to, let's say, choking someone with the Force. Because of the lack of rules, it just seems that Luke died for the dramatic effect and not as a result of his actions. Take this power away, take Luke away, and the Resistance would not have gotten away. Those are the 4 moments in which Force powers are expanded upon in extraordinary ways. Something that comes to me with all 4 of these instances though is that the appearance of these powers raise more questions than answers. As I've explained above, Leia's survival seems odd. Her use of Force powers even more so. What boundaries does Snoke's power have, and why couldn't he see through Kylo Ren's facade? How can a Force ghost suddenly cast lightning? Is an astral projection able or unable to interact with the physical world? Luke can kiss Leia on the head and hand objects over, but not get hit by a lightsaber or other laser beams. A great many questions that are unanswered and glossed over. Some are, of course, worse than others. The instances where without the particular Force power the scene would have progressed entirely different, probably in the defeat or death of a character, are the worst offenders. So to conclude, like I've explained, the Force is a soft magic system. The exact rules are never defined, but The Last Jedi stretches this freedom to many lengths that leaves audience wondering with the how, what and why of these powers. In some of these cases it feels like cheating, as I've explained, much as if the particular Force power was introduced just because the plot needed it. That is why I think people take issue with these new powers. Next episode, the final episode, we'll be talking about Luke Skywalker. I've been dying to make this episode because I think it is the most controversial part of this movie, so I saved the best for last. Thank you again for watching. That is a wrap for now, until the next story. Cheers.